Hi, and welcome to another episode of Sociology and Coffee. Though I have my coffee per usual, I want to give another shout out to the Blackness for this sisterhood shirt. This is absolutely representative for who I am and what I support. Like, as a Black woman, I will always support and uplift and empower other Black women. It's something we don't get from a lot of people. And so I've already had, just from dropping my daughter off at school this morning, 2 people be like, hey, I see you, sis, wearing this shirt. And so that is something that we need in this society right now, especially right now, considering we are waiting for an answer in regards to the people being held accountable for the death of Breonna Taylor. Yes, there was a $12 million settlement that occurred with the family, but money is not justice. A settlement is not justice. That just, again, shows what our society is built around. We think that we can buy anything, and money is not justice. So we are not satisfied until the 3 officers that killed Breonna Taylor are indicted and charged and sentenced according to their crime, which was first-degree murder, in my opinion. And so that's not my topic today, y'all. But I just had to go on that little rant. I want to talk about voting. So I had a student, an international student, ask me, do you think that we should vote even if we're not informed? Because I was kind of pushing this idea of like, look, some people right now are not allowed to vote. We have people with felony records who were disenfranchised. So if you have a felony on your record, in most states, this is something that some states are trying to fix. But as it stands, if you have a felony record, you cannot vote. You are no longer allowed to do your civic duty. If you are undocumented, you are not allowed to vote. There's all of these things that stop people from voting. And so for me, as someone who can vote, I find it my duty to vote, whether or not I'm voting for things that my undocumented friends would agree with necessarily, or that my the folks with the felony that I know would agree with. I'm still voting and doing my part. And so I kind of wanted to go in and talk a little bit about some of the propositions that we have in California that we'll be able to vote on. A lot of the times we so heavily focus on the presidential election, and especially right now when we have the choice between 2 candidates that are not a perfect fit, period, right? I will say that flat out. I do not think that Trump nor Biden is going to do anything for my community, for Black people, that is going to actually alter our lives and make this a very livable environment and society for us to be in. Right? Neither one of them are perfect. And so that should not deter you from voting. That should not deter you from voting. I hate to say it. If you have to pick the lesser of 2 evils, you do that. But there are still other things on the ballot that you need to be voting on. And so I'm going to say the things that are important to me that have real everyday implications for like all of us, right? Yes, the presidential seat is very important. I would love to see Trump out of office. I will say that loud and clear. I do not care. But at the same time, we have other things we need to vote on. One of those is going to be Prop 16. So this would end the ban on affirmative action. So this would overturn Prop 209. So a little backstory, I just want to give a shout out to those Black students at UC Berkeley who actually went in with, I don't know why, Shirley Weber, sorry, I just blanked on her name for a second. They actually really, really influenced her bringing this proposition up, right? And so shout out to those Black students at UC Berkeley. I know that was so much pain and labor that was done. But it's giving me chills because just as a Black student, we don't get to focus on just being in school. So these UC Berkeley Black students, making up less than 1% of their campus, went out and made such a huge influence that they were able to push this proposition to Shirley Weber, who then backed the proposition, right? And so let's just talk about the everyday implications of this. Prop 16 would overturn Prop 209. So Prop 209 banned affirmative action. Affirmative action allowed you to take into account race and gender, and amongst other things in regards to admissions for colleges, employment, etc. And this is really important to talk about, right? I'm pulling up my little data really quick. So Prop 209 forced the state to use race and gender blind criteria in admissions, as well as when contracting or setting aside resources for identity-based groups. So you're not allowed to really go out and say, hey, we have a lack of Black student representation or Black faculty representation on this campus. I want to hire specifically Black faculty. You're not allowed to say that right now because of Prop 209. And that's problematic for someone like me as a Black student who's navigated various institutions all the way up to my master's degree, because I have been heavily influenced by the Black faculty in my life. I would not be where I'm at without the Black faculty in my life. And yet they're still very heavily underrepresented in community college specifically, where we have 2/3 of our Black student population. So having a heavy concentration of Black faculty in that space is very important. We know that. A lot of us know that. We know that we need more Black faculty representation. But when it comes to hiring, we are not allowed to go out and in the application or in the admission or in the recruitment process say, we need Black faculty. Not allowed. Although we know this, right? We know that the data, there's only about 2 to 3% of faculty members are Black on college campuses, specifically in community college. CSU and UC gets a little bit, actually less. There's less in a UC and CSU system. But also what this does to Black students, right? So let's kind of give like a hypothetical example really quick on how this is applied. Let's say that you have the top 5 students from San Alejo Hills in high school, right? So top 5 seniors, where San Alejo Hills, we know because of the way schools are funded, their houses are very expensive up in San Alejo. So that means their schools are heavily funded. So public schools are funded through property taxes. The more money that your houses cost, my words are getting all messed up. But anyways, not editing that out. So y'all gonna see me trip up. This is how I teach too. So this is what it is. You're getting the real me. And so the more property taxes, the higher the value of the home, the more money gets funneled into that school. Okay. So you have 5 students from some school in San Alejo Hills, and the top 5, right? Top 5. And then you have the top 5 students out here in Oceanside, right? Oceanside High School is not in a very rich neighborhood at all. The houses in that neighborhood are I would even guess about half the price of the houses in San Alejo Hills. And so although they are both the top 5 students, right? We know that their education has been greatly impacted by the lack of resources, specifically in Oceanside. So they are not getting the same quality education, but yet the ones in Oceanside, they are still the top 5, right? So let's bring race into this. So the ones at San Alejo Hills are more than likely going to be white students. That neighborhood demographically is predominantly white. Neighborhood in Oceanside, predominantly Black and brown. So more than likely, these top 5 students are going to be from Latinx, Chicanx, Black communities. Potentially Pacific Islander as well, because there's also a larger Pacific Islander community in Oceanside. So top 5 students, right? They all apply to UC Berkeley. UC Berkeley, as it stands now, is not allowed to take into account the educational inequality that has occurred in K through 12. So although the top 5 Black or brown or Pacific Islander students are the top 5, they are not going to be they're going to be held to the same sort of like standard as these prestigious, heavily funded schools who they're all taking AP, IB, they all have the money for private tutors, etc., etc. They're not allowed to take into account the differences in education that they've received. And this is very much along racial lines, period. Okay. And so what affirmative action allows them to do is to take these things into account. So, okay, we have 5 Black students, Black, brown, Chicanx, students of color, we'll just say, very high performing in their neighborhood, right? They should be considered at the same level as the top 5 in San Alejo, taking into account the racial inequality, educational inequality that they have received due to the way that schools are funded. And so hopefully that makes somewhat of sense. Prop 16 would overturn Prop 209, meaning we would be allowed to go in and talk about racial, gendered inequality that happens. This does not mean that they're letting unqualified people in. Like, that is a myth. This does not mean that they are allowing, oh, you get 2 extra points because you're brown. That's not affirmative action. That is a myth. Right now, the number 1 beneficiaries of affirmative action are white women. So because gender is included in there, white women have in the past been the number 1 beneficiaries of affirmative action policies. So again, this does not mean that you are letting in unqualified people of color, right? So let's just bash that myth really quick. This may be a longer video, y'all. So just hopefully you bear with me. All of this stuff is really important. The next proposition is going to be Prop 17. So this would restore the right to vote to people on parole. So this hints at what I talked about previously about disenfranchisement of communities. So if you are on parole or have a felony record, you are not allowed to vote. And so that happened back in 1974, where if you committed a felony or if you were on parole, you were not allowed to vote. Right. And so this would allow these people to be able to vote. And so what this does, 40,000 Californians who are not in prison, they are not able to vote right now. 40,000 people currently in California not able to vote because this law about having a felony record. And mind you, it doesn't say what kind of felony record. I know personally in my own family, people who have felony records for very small, low-level offenses, and they cannot vote. And yet they have to live with the repercussions. They are not in prison anymore. They are on parole, so they are still, under state control. And yet they have to live in this society where they're not allowed to vote for the very things that influence and impact their lives. Just think about that one. Prop 18, letting some 17-year-olds vote. And so this would allow 17-year-olds, U.S. citizens, to vote in a primary election as long as they'll turn 18 by the general election. There's things to say about that. I personally don't have a huge opinion on that. I feel like if you are informed, you should be allowed to vote. And so I'm not assuming there's an assumption that youth are not informed about their process. Right now, y'all, our youth are the ones with the boots on the ground. Our youth are the ones who are carrying through a lot of the activism that is happening on the streets. And so don't assume that because of people's age, that they are not informed, period. So there's another, really important ones about taxes, Prop 21 about rent control. The next ones, so Prop 25 is also a very interesting one for me. So this would ask voters to either approve or strike down a state law that banished money bail. So right now, as of 2018, there is an end to cash bail in California. So rather than letting people pay their way out of jail while they await trial, the law gives judges the right to determine whether someone who is arrested should be kept behind bars on the risk they are deemed to pose to themselves or others. And so this is an interesting one for me. This is a very interesting one for me because you have to understand how the criminal justice system works, right? And who benefits from cash bail. But also you have to take into account, this is under the judge's discretion. So they get to decide whether or not somebody gets to be out on bail while they're awaiting trial, which can be very problematic as well. But this also kind of takes the price off of getting out of jail. So people who cannot afford bail are no longer going to be, they're still going to be impacted, right? Because if you couldn't afford bail, to begin with. And, this proposition happens. Well, now you don't have the option of bail. So no matter what, you're still waiting in prison or jail awaiting trial. But what this would impact is people with the money to pay their bail. If a judge decides some rich, guy, girl, person, needs to stay in jail to await their trial, they cannot buy their way out, right? They cannot say, oh, I have $100,000. I can pay my bail. Let's go. It is, again, up to the judge. It's up to the judge's discretion. And so, those are the ones that really, really stick out to me in regards to affecting my everyday life. I know a lot of people who would be influenced by these. My work would be influenced by Prop 16 and the ban on affirmative action. And so, I got all this information from calmatters.org. And so that's calmatters.org. Please go in, look at these propositions, vote locally, vote for your mayor, vote for all of these things. Don't get caught up in this Trump versus Biden. Yes, it's important, and we do need a president that is going to be representative of the people. Have we ever really had that? I would argue no. The way that politics are set up, it is not set up for our everyday people, for everyday working class people. There's always going to be people who are hurt. There's always going to be people who, gain power through things like this. And so don't get caught up in that. Don't allow that be your reason not to vote. Don't allow Trump and Biden be your reason not to vote. There are other things on the ballot that have everyday real life implications for our communities, and you have to vote. All right? We have to vote, period. Cheers.